Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are opening a door into what has to be one of the most meticulously guarded and frankly profoundly disturbing secrets of the Qajar dynasty of Persia.
And we're not talking about grand military campaigns or, diplomatic treaties.
No, we're talking about something that sounds almost benign on the surface. The 6-month pre-wedding preparation ritual for royal brides.
It sounds like a detail of courtly life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Something maybe focused on embroidery or etiquette.
Exactly.
But based on the documents we've managed to piece together, diaries, physicians' notes, internal palace correspondence, our mission today is to show that this preparation was, in reality, a systematic process of psychological destruction.
Meticulously designed, you said.
Meticulously. It was engineered not just to train a young woman, but to completely erase her autonomy and replace it with absolute predictable compliance.
And to really wrap your head around the true nature of this, we need to start with a specific moment, a specific sound, actually, recorded in 1847 at Golestan Palace.
Yeah, the sources describe this moment late one night when a screaming began in the inner chambers. It was a sound so primal and so terrifying that it unnerved the veteran guards stationed outside.
These are men used to battle, to violence.
Absolutely. And the documents describe it as screaming that rose past the pitch of human anguish, a sound, and this is a direct quote, like a mind-breaking, high-pitched animal.
Wow.
It was so disturbing that the guards, these men trained in warfare and brutality, actually pressed themselves against the stone walls, trying to escape the echo. They were paralyzed by it.
That was the scream of 16-year-old Princess Zara on her wedding night. And here's the core, terrifying insight our sources reveal.
It's the key of the whole thing.
The scream wasn't caused by the wedding night itself. Zara had actually managed to survive the physical reality of that union through a profound state of dissociation, a kind of protective mental numbness.
The screaming began when that carefully cultivated dissociation mechanism failed.
It snapped.
It just snapped. And when her consciousness suddenly and violently came rushing back into her body, she felt the entire 6 months of accumulated terror, confusion, violation, and systematic mental erasure hit her all at once.
So the fear wasn't the event, it was the preparation.
The emotional and cognitive backlog was so intense that the palace records themselves suggest the brides feared this ritual more than death itself.
That's an astonishing statement. So to set the context for this level of state-sanctioned psychological horror, we need to briefly look at the Qajar dynasty. This was a massive power structure.
A huge, enduring power. The Qajar regime controlled a vast empire for nearly 140 years. They used a blend of ruthless conquest and strategic diplomacy to amass immense wealth and centralized power.
But at the heart of their dominance,
At the very heart of it, the Shah and his advisors understood a fundamental, chilling truth. To maintain absolute power, you have to ensure the complete and total erasure of resistance.
even in the most intimate parts of the court.
Especially there. And this systematic erasure, it was most efficiently and precisely applied to the royal women who served as the linchpins of political stability.
So Zara's story, as personal and tragic as it is, it's actually a lens.
It's the perfect lens. It's precisely because the system worked perfectly on her that it gives us this clear, devastating look into a sophisticated historical blueprint for total psychological control.
Okay, so let's start there. The very idea of what it meant to be a daughter in this dynasty.
Well, the first thing you have to do is discard any modern notions of royal privilege or personal choice. It just doesn't apply. A daughter of the Shah, she wasn't born into a life of luxury defined by autonomy.
She was born into a transaction.
Explicitly, the sources are so clear on this. Her body was, and I quote, political currency. Her marriage was state policy.
And her will, her own thoughts and feelings.
Irrelevant. That's the word used again and again. Irrelevant to the larger machinery of the empire.
So these marriages were cold, calculated deals.
Completely. They were about securing essential military alliances or bringing an unruly neighboring province firmly into the fold. Sometimes it was about rewarding a profoundly loyal minister.
And the girl was the seal on the contract.
She was the human element guaranteeing the stability of the pact. She wasn't a princess in any romantic sense we'd recognize. She was a highly valuable, highly controlled resource.
Let's look at Zara's specific case. She's just 16 in 1847.
Right, but the decision about her future, that was made 2 years earlier. It was formalized in a council chamber, a room filled with the highest male advisors.
A room she couldn't enter, of course.
Of course not. It was treated like a military decision, finalized, as one source noted, with the speed of execution.
Meaning, once the political need was identified, the human factor was just accelerated.
Exactly. And the political need was a man named Mira Hassan Khan, a powerful military commander, 43 years old,
Nearly 3 decades her senior.
and already married twice. He commanded these vast northern land holdings that were critical to the security of the empire's borders.
So what did he need from a 16-year-old girl?
It was purely strategic. He needed her sufficiently royal bloodline. That's the key. It would guarantee absolute legitimacy for any sons she might bear him,
Which would solidify his rank.
and place his descendants above any potential rivals. Zara, the individual, the person, she didn't matter. Her genes did.
Was this ever explained to them, or was it just in the air they breathed?
It was absorbed. No one sat her down and delivered a state lecture. But she would have heard fragments of conversations, seen the shift in how people looked at her, and then she felt that sudden, immediate rigidity of her environment once the decree was issued.
And before that, she had some freedom.
Relative freedom, yes. The sources say she loved walking in the private gardens, spent hours in the library studying Persian philosophy and poetry. She had a personality. She had an inner life.
And that just disappeared.
Overnight, the shift was immediate and brutal. Rigid restrictions on everything. She was assigned an older eunuch who followed her everywhere, a constant supervisor.
Her whole world just shrank.
It narrowed to a single terrifying point: preparation for the wedding night. The sources are clear. Nothing else about her life mattered anymore.
And this is where we meet the architects of erasure, as you call them.
Yes, the women tasked with this destruction. Their titles sound so formal, so proper. The overseer of brides, the mistress of ritual, the guardian of propriety.
But we need to strip those titles away.
We have to. They were architects of erasure. These were often older women, sometimes former brides themselves, who had survived and, internalized the system.
So they weren't just being cruel for cruelty's sake?
No, they weren't emotionally invested in it. They applied psychological pressure with a kind of calm efficiency, surgical precision.
Like it was a bureaucratic process of torture.
It was, because they saw themselves as fulfilling a sacred duty to the state. And their methods were honed over generations of repetition. They knew exactly which pressures, applied consistently over 6 months, would infallibly break a young woman's capacity for autonomous thought.
Reducing her to an instrument?
A perfectly functioning, compliant instrument. The system perfected itself through experience.
So once these architects took over, the dismantling began. And it's fascinating where they started, not with physical pain, but with her voice.
With language, because
Yes.
language is the architecture of identity. The first and most insidious change was the deliberate, continuous reduction of Zara's working vocabulary over that 6-month period.
It's an act of profound cognitive control.
It's aimed right at the mechanism of self-awareness.
How extreme was this restriction?
Incredibly restrictive. She was permitted to speak only in direct response to a question, and even then her responses were limited to a formal pool of exactly 43 approved phrases.
43. That's it. For 6 months. What kind of phrases?
They were all formulaic expressions of agreement, apology, gratitude, and request. So things like, "Yes, as you wish, mistress," or "Forgive my inadequacy."
Yeah.
"Thank you for your kindness. With permission, may I approach?" All of them are completely non-committal, subservient. They reinforce her inferior position in every single interaction.
So the moment she tried to express a complex thought, a feeling, a protest.
She was outside the boundary.
Yeah.
And that was the transgression. Any attempt to use language creatively to express fear or confusion outside those 43 approved loops was met with, well, not physical punishment, but incredibly painful consequences.
Which were?
Immediate isolation, exclusion from meals, a visible chilling disdain from the overseers, and crucially, from the other girls.
And this analysis of language is so key. If you can't articulate your fear, you can't process it.
Exactly. Language gives you psychic distance from your own emotions. By forcing her to limit her verbal output to these simple, compliant formulas, you're dismantling her capacity for complex, critical thought. She couldn't articulate her confusion, so the fear and doubt just calcified inside her. That's the phrase from the source.
Her internal world was just flooded with no outlet.
And it didn't stop there. The system was sophisticated enough to weaponize her peers. Zara was being trained alongside 7 other young women. They should have been her support network.
Her only potential source of comfort.
Instead, they became another lever of control. If one girl transgressed, the others were explicitly told that her non-compliance jeopardized all of their preparations.
So the girls were forced to police each other.
It creates this truly perverse, self-sustaining system of social annihilation. They internalize the palace's rules and apply them to each other. They policed the boundaries of the 43 phrases.
Viewing potential allies as threats?
Exactly. There's a really powerful anecdote about a girl named Soraya.
Right, I saw that.
Soraya saw Soraya try to comfort another girl who was having a panic attack, a moment of human connection.
And what happened?
Both were isolated instantly. Soraya was told, "You are undermining necessary conditioning. Sympathy is weakness." The other girl, the one having the attack, was told Soraya's comfort wasn't genuine, that it was a test designed to show her inadequacy.
The lesson was absolute.
Connection is dangerous. Other people can't be trusted. It breaks the most fundamental human need for affiliation.
And it worked on Zara.
It did. Within just a few weeks of this, she stopped speaking voluntarily, almost entirely. She'd answer when pressed, but otherwise she retreated into this profound silence. And her mind filled that silence with what the sources call increasingly dark narratives.
Her own mind turning against itself.
And constant hypervigilance, scanning every face, every movement for evidence that she had failed yet another unseen test.
Having attacked her voice and her social bonds, the system then moved to her body. And this isn't just about teaching posture.
No, this is about programming her body for submission at the most basic neurological level. She spent hours every single day practicing what the palace called the 8 movements of submission.
And these were basically exercises in programmed humiliation.
That's the perfect way to put it. Take the greeting bow. It required her eyes to drop to the floor before her torso began its descent.
Why that order specifically?
Because if the eyes remained up even for a fraction of a second, it suggested evaluation, assessment, an independent mind. The physical act was forcing her to preemptively submit her gaze before her body.
What about the others? The serving bow.
That was about spatial positioning. Lowering herself from a position of power, standing tall, to a position of reception, almost kneeling whenever she accepted anything, even a cup of water. It constantly reinforced that her default state was lower than everyone else.
But the sources say the most damaging one was the retreat bow.
The retreat bow was diabolical in its design. It required her to move backward from authority without ever turning her back.
Which is physically awkward.
It's a physical impossibility if you're trying to do it with any speed or grace. It forces this contorted posture, straining to look back while walking in these tiny, precise steps. It was designed to force constant failure, constant correction, constant humiliation.
So the failure wasn't a flaw in the training.
The constant failure was the training. You cannot retreat gracefully while maintaining forward-facing deference. She was perpetually off balance, creating a physical feeling of uncertainty and weakness. That feeling was meant to become her new normal.
And the detail about the angles. This is where the bureaucratic nature of the torture just stands out.
It's chilling. The angle of her neck in the greeting bow had to be exactly 30 degrees, not 35, which was judged too languid, not 25, which was insufficiently deferential.
An impossible, hyper-specific metric designed to ensure she could never truly succeed.
Or relax. And her steps had to be small, careful, uncertain, no more than the length of her own foot.
Which physically constrains her.
A wide stride suggests confidence, purpose. By forcing her steps to be minuscule, the training literally programmed her body to be smaller, less threatening, to take up minimal space in the world.
And how is this enforced?
By the older women, Zainab and Mariam, they circulated like she was, as the source says, livestock being assessed. They used sharp words and physical adjustment.
What were some of the things they'd say?
They were surgical. Zainab would physically press down on her back and snarl, "Your spine too straight. You're not broken enough yet." Mariam would constantly zero in on her gaze. "Your eyes too direct. Look down, always down. What are you trying to do?" Challenge him.
And if she showed any hint of her old self, any confidence in her step.
It was made public. The other girls were called to watch the correction. Zainab would use it as a lesson for everyone. This is what happens when a bride forgets her place.
The psychological effect of that. Feeling your own body betray you.
It became the enemy. Her muscles wouldn't hold the impossible positions. And the constant repetitive motions under extreme stress created what we now recognize as a trance state. The body just internalizes the coercion.
You're saying this rewrites the nervous system?
Absolutely. The autonomic nervous system starts to automatically adopt patterns of submission and withdrawal to minimize threat. And the final chilling result was that even when Zara was alone, she would catch herself moving in these small, submissive ways, tilting her head down, shortening her steps. Her body had been weaponized against her conscious mind.
So she's isolated, her language is gone, her body is trained for submission. The next escalation is the testing.
Yes, the mechanism designed to install absolute dread. This was presented as preparation for her husband, but it was pure psychological warfare.
These were the role-play scenarios.
Constant and unpredictable. Zainab would often play the role of Mir Hassan Khan, and she was deliberately, capriciously cruel, unpredictably angry, impossible to satisfy.
So even if Zara performed a movement perfectly,
It didn't matter. Zainab would weaponize the performance, Zara would execute a perfect bow, and Zainab would turn cruel. You did that wrong? That awkwardness will displease your husband so profoundly, he might cast you aside.
the threat was always utter failure, even in success.
And the threats were always incomplete. That's the kind of thing that ends in, and then just silence, a cold stare, leaving Zara to fill in the blanks with the worst possible outcomes.
The psychological trap got even more sadistic, though, with the idea of intuiting error.
That was the pinnacle of the conditioning. Zainab would intentionally perform an action wrongly. When Zara failed to intervene, Zainab would blame her, saying she should have intuited the mistake and prevented it.
So she was responsible not only for her own perfect compliance, but for the errors of her abuser.
It's an absolute no-win scenario.
Yeah.
And if that wasn't shattering enough, there was social erasure.
Psychological death.
Zainab would abruptly stop acknowledging Zara's presence. She'd turn to the other overseers and speak about Zara as if she were an inanimate object.
What would she say?
Things like, I can barely look at her anymore. What a profound disappointment. Poor man, his bride will be such a burden. And the other women's silence or agreement reinforced this total social erasure. It confirmed to Zara she had lost her status as a human being.
And all of this was designed to create what we now call learned helplessness.
Absolutely. The Qajar architects had figured this out centuries before modern psychology gave it a name. When effort is useless and punishment is random, the brain internalizes the belief that one cannot control the environment.
And so you just stop trying.
You give up agency.
Yeah.
And the unpredictability was the key. The testing happened randomly during meals, in the corridors. Her nervous system was trained to exist in a permanent, low-level electric current of terror. Nowhere was safe.
Which sounds like a blueprint for chronic, severe anxiety.
It was. By month 3, her body was physiologically adapted to this. She developed severe sleep fragmentation, waking up around 3 a.m. in full-blown panic attacks.
And the palace's reaction to this clear evidence of trauma.
It was praised. The older women saw the racing pulse, the shallow breathing, the inability to sleep as a positive sign of progress. They noted she was developing the proper anxiety.
Because
As they said, Hassan Khan will find her very manageable. Her breakdown guaranteed her compliance.
And of course, sleep deprivation itself is a recognized form of torture.
It's profoundly effective. It degrades cognitive function. An exhausted brain can't resist suggestion. They understood that exhaustion made the mind pliable for the final stages.
As the psychological siege intensified, the final fragmentation began, and this is with the medical component.
Yes. The weekly examinations by a physician, Dr. Mirza Bayram. These were not about health. They were about the final objectification of Zara's body.
He served the palace for 30 years.
And he approached this with what the source calls clinical precision and absolute invasiveness. He was checking for defects, but he went far beyond that.
What did that involve?
He tested her flexibility, sometimes forcing her limbs beyond their normal range, creating these small, sharp pains that she was implicitly forbidden from reacting to.
Yeah.
It was physical coercion masquerading as medicine.
And the quantifying of her body. That detail is particularly dehumanizing.
It's the moment she becomes data. Measurements were meticulously taken and recorded. Height, arm span, hip circumference. The source notes this quantified her in the way one might quantify livestock being evaluated for breeding.
The psychological function here is critical.
It's teaching her, through relentless repetition, that her body could be accessed without her consent, that her physical autonomy was an illusion. She was property.
And it was after these examinations that her mind found its last desperate survival mechanism.
Dissociation. The notes say she would stare at her hands after the examinations, feeling disconnected from the sensation, as if there was a layer of glass between her mind and her body.
This is the mind's ultimate protective function.
Against unbearable trauma, yes. The mind removes consciousness from the body. She was present, but she wasn't there. It allows survival, but at the cost of permanent fragmentation. The self is shattered.
And this was then reinforced by the formal instruction on marital relations.
Delivered by Soraya, a former bride herself. She used deliberately vague, coded language to generate maximum psychological fear.
The instructions were simple.
How to position herself, how to remain completely still, how to make no sound. The message was delivered flatly. Your pleasure is irrelevant, your preference is irrelevant, your comfort is irrelevant.
You're an object.
An empty vessel. And the vagueness about what would actually happen was intentional, allowing her mind to generate the worst possible scenarios.
And then the final catalyst, in the last week.
Zainab introduced the sexual instruments. She was brought into a private room and shown these objects, their purpose unclear to her but obviously terrifying. Zainab presented them with utter clinical detachment.
And her final words.
You will not object. You will not resist.
Right.
You will not feel pain because you will have learned not to feel. At that moment, Zara reportedly felt an actual sensation of internal shattering.
Her mind just shut down.
The panic attacks became severe and persistent. She was entirely non-functional. The physician was called again, but this time he administered opiates, a potent sedative.
To make her manageable for the ceremony.
It facilitated a dumb compliance, and the older women saw this induced compliant fog as the final absolute success of their training.
The wedding day arrives. Zara is already detached from reality.
But the physical ritual continues. Servants spent 4 hours preparing her, treating her body like a porcelain doll, beautiful and lifeless. She was draped in heavy silk.
And the jewelry itself carried a message.
A message of disposability. She was given pieces that had belonged to previous wives of Hassan Khan, including one who had died of melancholy, a euphemism for depression or suicide.
The message being, you are replaceable.
And your fate may be the same as theirs.
The ceremony itself was brief, but impersonal.
Consent was purely mechanical. Since she was dissociated, she couldn't speak or nod. A servant gave her a nudge, and a muffled sound was interpreted as consent. She signed the contract in this foggy state.
She was then taken to the bridal chamber.
Draped in this beautiful, seductive red silk, a stark contradiction to the terror she carried. She was given a final, heavy dose of the sedative, and Miriam locked the door.
Hassan Khan arrived later.
Partially drunk. He used her without a word and then left. And Zara remained motionless, entirely protected by her dissociation.
And the older women came to check?
They checked the sheets for blood, confirming the transaction was completed successfully. They were satisfied. And then the system failed.
That's when the screaming began.
The screaming was the sound of her mind finally giving way, the catastrophic failure of the dissociation. It was the full, abrupt re-inhabitation of her body, forcing her to feel 6 months of terror, violation, and erasure all at once.
A complete psychotic break.
Yes. The palace's long-term solution was heavy sedation. She was placed in a permanent fog. And by their measure, she was a perfect success. She bore him a son within the year and 3 more children after that.
She performed her duties with exemplary obedience.
But the tragedy, the true cost, is that the brilliant young girl who loved philosophy was gone. She was replaced by a woman who moved through life like a ghost, speaking only when spoken to, seeming only partially present.
A living automaton.
She lived for 37 more years, dying at 53 of a wasting illness. The physicians, in their private journals, were a bit more honest, noting she had simply seemed to give up.
Wow. And Zara's case wasn't unique. The sources show this was the intended outcome.
It's the consistency that's so horrifying. We have other examples. Princess Ashraf in 1823. Her diary entries document this gradual slide into incoherence. By month 4, it's just disconnected phrases. Not myself, always watched. Can't remember why I moved this way.
And then,
by month 6, the entries stop. The mind stopped trying to record its own existence. The erasure was complete.
And Princess Fatima in 1856.
She tried to physically flee. When they found her in the gardens, she was in a state of complete catatonia. Unresponsive, she never fully returned to conscious engagement with the world.
Princess Nosrat in 1841.
Described as moving like a doll manipulated by invisible strings. The emotional core hollowed out. The consistency across decades confirms the protocols were repeatable and effective.
And the complicity of the medical system in all this.
It's one of the most sickening parts. They weren't healers. They were technicians of compliance. We have notes from a doctor's journal from 1834 describing a bride with all the signs of severe trauma anxiety, sleep deprivation.
And how did he frame it?
He lists the symptoms and then writes, appropriate for her intended purpose. He viewed her suffering as desirable proof that the training was working. They were measuring success by how thoroughly she had been broken.
But there were acts of resistance.
Absolutely, and they're heartbreaking because the methods used to crush them were so sophisticated. Princess Seuss refused the submission movements. She wasn't beaten.
She faced complete social death instead.
For 3 weeks, no one looked at her, spoke to her, or acknowledged her existence. Her eventual compliance is captured in that horrifying quote. Because I no longer exist, I cannot refuse what a ghost cannot do.
She complied only after her mind accepted it had been psychologically killed.
And Princess Miriam, who tried to befriend a servant. They were immediately separated. Miriam was told the servant had died. The lesson: connection means destruction.
For those with intellectual curiosity, like the princess whose books were burned in front of her.
Her interests were branded a mental disease that needed to be surgically removed. The system sought total erasure of the internal self.
And the empire rationalized all of this. For stability, for tradition.
But those are just rationalizations offered by people who had committed or were about to commit tremendous harm. And the real legacy here, the reason this matters so much, is that this Qajar technique, this blueprint for control, it didn't stay buried in the palace.
You're saying this is more than just history.
The Qajar operators were pioneers. They understood learned helplessness, dissociation, and coercive control through practical application, long before these concepts were studied in Western labs.
And that knowledge spread?
Globally, the mechanisms they refined: isolation, surveillance, restricted speech, random punishment, induced hypervigilance, they were studied and refined by 20th century intelligence agencies for interrogations.
And they were adapted by cults.
To break down new recruits. They're documented in labs studying coercive control in intimate relationships. The Qajar system proved it was possible to completely destroy a person's will purely psychologically.
Without the inefficiency or embarrassing evidence of physical violence.
The ability to destroy autonomy without leaving a bruise, that is the sinister sophistication here.
So this deep dive shows us that the systematic destruction of these young women was carefully designed psychological torture, administered by the state to ensure absolute compliance.
And knowing this history, it allows us to name these ongoing patterns today: coercive control, psychological torture. Naming the mechanisms is the first step toward refusal.
Zara's story proves that the most effective, enduring violence is often the kind that leaves no visible marks, the kind that happens inside someone's mind.
And the intensity with which the empire and later historians tried to bury these accounts suggests that the official version of history we're usually taught has been meticulously edited for comfort.
Which forces you to ask,
what other unedited versions of historical trauma, particularly those that targeted the mind and the internal self, are still actively shaping our understanding of power, vulnerability, and human resilience today?